I do have a few follow-up questions that I can ask the panel, but I first want to just kind of open it up to you all and see if you have something you want to follow up on, or have one of the speakers play off of one of the others. Anyone? Please.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the very insightful, thoughtful talk by all three of you. If you had to create a team that's maximizing or optimizing the power of big data.
There's a microphone there for you.
If you had to put together a team that's maximizing the value that this big data, thick data offers, what will be the skill set or types of people you like to put in that team so the business innovation or the value of that effort is maximized?
You'd like to take that first.
Well, I think I just was alluding, one of my suggestions already was that any team needs to have people who understand the qualitative aspect. And so you need to have people like ethnographers or design researchers on your team. But the thing is, it's really hard to find those people because a lot of times our education system and the way we learn is not set up so that there are qualitative people who actually embrace the quantitative. And then it's also really hard to find people who are trained in the quantitative world of engineering and computer science to also know how to work with the qualitative. But I think that an ideal team would have a mix of those kinds of skill sets. And I think that it's totally learnable though. You don't need to, I think it's controversial for me to say, but I think ethnographers often tell me, well, I shouldn't be saying this, but I think everyone can learn the skills of being an ethnographer, of being a good qualitative researcher. I think we're all born ethnographers. It means you just have to be curious. But it's just a simple skill set that you have to learn. And that's why, my company, we teach those skill sets to companies. And I think another skill set that's really important is that you need people who are obsessed with making sure that whatever insights you come up with really fulfill a business need. I think some of this work has so much been in R&D labs for a long time that a lot of people coming out with machine learning experience, whatever, they've had the privilege of being very protected, in research labs. And I think it's very important that now that we're moving into, we have people who are starting companies and making sure that we can apply those skills. It's even actually sometimes harder just to find people who say, well, how do we make sure that the things we're coming up with are going to help us grow a company and are usable and really going to solve meaningful human problems that are in enterprise or whoever the end user is, or if it's out there in the consumer-facing world. But I think those kind of skill sets, the business and the qualitative and the quantitative, having everyone understand those. Everyone has to understand those three skill sets. Of course, everyone is an expert in their own realm, but I think that's the dream team.
Ashu, in your talk, you mentioned data plus human elements. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. I think that part of it is a skill and part of it is mindset.
Is your mic on?
I think it is.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So the way I look at it, it's the skills plus mindset. So as an example, like I've interviewed a lot of people on the data science roles, right? And one question that I used to ask is that, okay, you worked on the last problem, right? What algorithms did you use? And this, I'm slightly dated now, it's like 2-year, 3-year-old examples, but now everyone says TensorFlow. Earlier they used to say, okay, I tried SVM, I tried Naive, I tried boosting, I tried Gaussian mixture models or something, any number of models, right, as an example. Or this is the data set I used, that's the data set I used. And how did you decide which one to use? Well, I just tried everything that was available in the library and saw which one works, right? And now you suddenly know that the person has no intuition. They have no understanding of what data is. And that person is not going to be a good fit for any data analysis role. But so the key thing is that I don't care what model you used. I really want to understand why you picked that model. What made you think about that model? Or what data you used and why did that data? How did you craft it, right? Or did you do any analysis? Like one other common thing that I would say is that how often you just stare at the data. It sounds crazy. But depending upon the problem that you're solving, of course, you have to map it to that problem and that scenario, right? But to me, it's all about like with salespeople, right? I'm less interested in knowing what deals you closed, what are the deals you did not close in the early days, right? And what's going on over there. So really understand the people if they have the right mindset around the data versus they think of data as like this magic which will solve every problem.
I find that it's so hard to find people who can talk about which machine learning data set they use and to talk about it in terms of understanding the limitations and assumptions or biases that go into each one. I find that so that's really common that people are like, oh, I use this because it was just available, or they're so excited. But then I'm like, well, what were the limitations and assumptions that went into it, and why did you choose this one over this one? And it's really hard to engage people in that kind of conversation. So I don't know.
Yeah, I guess it's important to really think of solving the problem. We need people who think of the problems, not necessarily of all the tools and knowing all the tools. That necessarily doesn't help you. Going back to both the examples that you're saying, I think as people, something that works very well for me, and I've seen a lot of people, right? You learn from examples. So, like in your case that you're saying, you want to be able to look at the data, stare at it, and understand what those examples are talking to you, right? What they are saying. And yes, you might be able to build models that work, that let's say give you 70%, 90% accuracy, whatever, in terms of the metric that you're measuring. But if it's making very common mistakes or the kind of mistakes that you don't want, but just because the data set or the test set is not covering those, you'll be missing those. So you really want to be curious, I guess, going back to your thing, and think of solving the right problems, and then the how and the details and the tools. There are lots of them available, so yeah, that's really not the big deal.
Tricia, I had a question for you. Can thoughtful data fit into current measures of success, or do companies need to shift their definition of success?
Success for what? A business
Business
product
outcome.
or outcome?
Success in a decision or a business decision, for example, based on data.
Well, one thing that I'm seeing is that a lot of times companies set KPIs in a way that doesn't really make room for the unknown, or they're setting it just because it's the way things have always been done, and they're not asking themselves, well, why are we doing this? And so it's almost like this blind leading the blind. And I think I don't know if that really has to do with data in itself, but it's a mindset of it's more of a symptom. It's a symptom of the way of hierarchical organizations, and that the people who are oftentimes closest to the data, to the experience. So it's oftentimes the most customer-facing people, like the sales team or the customer service people. They oftentimes know what the measures of success are, what should be done, but they're dealing with these measures that have been set from up high and that are coming down on them. And so I don't think this is a data issue, more so that it's symptomatic of large organizations, and that we need to have decision makers, that we need to close the gap between decision makers and the people who are closest to the ground and sending the data up. They should be talking and working in more smaller iterative teams. And right now I feel like that gap is too wide, and that's what slows down decision making.
Interesting. That's not so much a data question. That's really
No,
a social
I don't think so.
organization question.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yes, Rajendra.
So, Ashu, you mentioned intuition. I am having trouble filling the gap between like intuition and the underlying technology. So you ask somebody, what's the intuition you have? They give you some great intuition. Then what do you do next? How does it translate to the technology?
A very simple example is like e-commerce example. So what would happen is that you're trying to predict the model around what product sells, what does not sell, right? Now, how does the sale price kicks in, right? So if suppose you don't build any models, so one thing that we would do as an example is that you look at that people are buying shirts, right? And how the price changes over there is going to impact the conversion rate. So as a human being, I have an intuition that if the price is low, if you drop the price meaningfully, people will buy things. Now, if I'm not seeing that behavior in my data, something is wrong. right? It could be my intuition is wrong. It could very well be, right? But if I'm not seeing that, but on the other hand, if I'm not seeing that behavior, I want to first spend time digging into it to understand what's going on. Now, I mean, that's a very simple example, but that maps to pretty much any other setup that you can map it to, right? So whether, I mean, like on the e-commerce side, I would have examples, right? Like recommendation systems. You are trying to build the recommendation systems, right? And one very common recommendation system is that you look at what people bought, find similar things, and recommend to them, right? Now, intuitively, it all makes sense, right? But as you start peeling through it and say that what's really going on? Why is my system not working, right? If you just throw in all the data, right? And what you realize is that we had two customers. One was Staples. One was Neiman Marcus in my previous company, right? At Staples, people will buy the ink cartridge, and day in, day out, they will keep buying the same ink cartridge, right? At Neiman Marcus, people will buy a dress, and they will never, ever in their life buy the same dress again. So once you start looking at that and trying to understand the problem and bringing your intuition, and the last part that I said, right, the ink cartridge and dress, I didn't share any data with you, right? You just agreed with the statement I made because your intuition agrees with it, right? And to me, that is intuition. That as soon as I say, you're like, yeah, it makes sense, right? It's really intuitive, right? And then you have to see with the data, right? And is your model correct and everything designed appropriately or not?
Isn't that more about context, though, rather than intuition?
Intuition comes from knowing that context. If you completely new domain, right, I won't have any.
Intuition is more about the unknown versus context. If you say Neiman Marcus to somebody who's not familiar with the brand, they would be like,
Absolutely.
I have no idea, right?
So I think that's a great point, and to me there's an element over there, what is context and what is intuition. And what I was saying earlier is, I mean, part of it is philosophical answer. My theory, personal theory, is that our intuition is really nothing else but a human brain working as a machine over the data that we have seen over the years, right? So if I've not seen something, my intuition around that is actually very crappy. But if I've seen, that's my, it's partly philosophy.
Yep.
But they are driven by the data they have seen in the past, is my take. So if you're familiar with that context.
Yeah, there I would like to add is, I think often for data scientists, and everything we do, in fact, not just data science, everything we do in life, right? We often do it based on intuition. There are some people who do lots and lots of analysis before doing that, but often the final decisions are based on intuition. I think there too, I would say the other thing is also important to use the data to understand and validate the intuition or invalidate it so you make the right decisions. And so that sort of goes back to what Tricia was saying. It's important to combine the two. It's not necessary that you talk to a few people and that always gives you the right answer. You do want to take that and try and validate. And you know, in the Nokia case, I would say, yes, you were right. That's the direction the company went and so on. But I think there might have been a mix where you take that data. They probably had tons and tons of data on millions of people that were using those phones, or maybe billions at that time. And if you could put those together to understand that better, that you could actually get something more interesting and some new insights as well. So really being able to put them together in a nice way is important.
Rajat, how long do you think we are away from machines developing intuition and context and knowing when they're not looking at the right data?
Yeah, in that I would, to some extent agree with what Ashu was saying. We as humans, to a large extent, are just like machines that way, where we've just seen lots of data, and the one difference I would say today between the models and the machines that we see today is they see very narrow kinds of data on a very specific domain. So let's say you have an image model that's seen tons of images, and typically just of one kind, and it can do great in that. The way we work really well is we can combine data of many different kinds together and be able to put them together and learn from that. So, again, if you look at intuition as, say, the game of Go, where, now machines beat the best human very recently, the humans do think of that as intuition, the best move there that, these machines can make. So in some ways, machines can already be intuitive in that very, very specific domain. But to be broadly intuitive, just like humans are, that's far away. I would say there's still lots of work to be done.
So I had a question, Rajat. I look upon machines in general, in the context of computers, as something which is capable of doing things which goes beyond the capacity of humans most of the times, faster calculations or whatever. But when we are dealing with subjects like big data, this is also beyond human capacity, and that's why we are relying on machines to do the analysis and judgment for us. But when can I trust the machine? I mean, when can humans stop looking at whether the machine did the right thing or not? Because if we are coming back to the point saying that, I gave an algorithm, I fed an algorithm to a machine and it did its job, it produced some analytics for me. Still, as a human being, if I need to go back and validate whether the machine did the right thing or not, then it's still human intervention. And, the larger the data becomes, the more complex the data becomes, it's going to be even more difficult for human beings to even debug where the machine went wrong, right? So where do you see these things converging in the future that I can completely trust the machine and not have to validate?
So I think that's interesting. If you think of humans as well, to a large extent, we've become so specialized and technology has become so complex. We rely on lots of experts, right? Not everybody looks at data, not everybody does everything. And we rely on the experts to do those things, and at some point we just trust them because they understand that better. In the case of machines, like you said, there's just so much more data now, so much more compute, at least in very narrow domains, not that broad yet, that they're, for those specific domains, they can do just a lot more. You can think of them as really experts for those domains. And at some point, there's no hope for us to do better in those specific domains. So to give you an example, self-driving cars, we are talking about it. At some point, will we trust them? Absolutely. I think we'll have to. Right? Does it make sense? Yes. And we'll just trust that they make the right decisions, and they'll do a lot better than any of us can do. So it varies by domain when the time's going to come. It's definitely very, very different. In case of doctors and medicine and so on, yes, we'll probably go through several checks and balances before we get there. Same with self-driving cars and so on. But at some point, we will go past that and we will start to trust them.
There was another question over here.
So early in the summer, Facebook was working on some what looked like to be chatbots, and they seem to actually have taken a life of their own and started communicating with each other. And Facebook had to shut them down and understand what went wrong. They started to show capability beyond what they were programmed for. They showed ability to lead people down a certain path in negotiating with them, and then at the last minute kind of bait and switch them. Are you familiar with that, and what is your kind of point of view on this? It goes beyond where you're talking about a very narrow domain. It starts to show something broader than what you're describing right now.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I don't remember the details of that incident, but I remember that very clearly. A lot of that was media hype, sadly. There was very little reality to that, and the media took two different things together, completely unrelated, put them in this, amazing Arctic title or whatever, and that's what's picked up by the rest of the press. So as somebody who is really pushing on AI, and we would love for it to become good, that would be amazing if we were to be able to do that, but no, we are very far away from it. Yeah.
That's an example of data and thoughtful data.
It's over in your corner here.
So one, I think one of my comment was on the media hype, and to your start about 73% of the projects not being profitable. I think we are all guilty of using the latest buzzword, machine learning, AI, whatever it is, to sell more products. So side comment. My question to Ashu and Rajat is, so I'm in information security space, and one of the things that I'm struggling, there's a lot of companies claiming using machine learning in information security, but the challenge is that in this domain there is an adversary, right? So if you're trying to find a pattern of anything that has been done in past and finding an anomaly, or in pattern to find the next prediction, there is an adversary trying to defeat that, right? Is there work around specific that area? Have you seen a parallel domain where machines trying to learn from existing data, but there's an active adversary trying to defeat that pattern that has been learned? I hope that makes sense. Or what are parallels drawn?
Yeah, there are a number of areas. One is gaming itself, right? Chess or Go in the most recent case, where it's trying to play against each other and learn from each other. So those are simple examples, though. They're just playing games and doing that. A broader field in that area from a research perspective is what's called generative adversarial networks, where you have two networks playing against each other in terms of one is trying to generate examples that the other can't understand and so on. So very active research happening, lots of interesting cases and applicability as well. This is not a new problem per se, because if you look at spam or whatever, this problem has been there for a while. Machine learning has been used for a while. The models become smarter, the humans on the other side, or models as well, become smarter as well and keep doing that. So I don't see that getting solved anytime soon, but we're definitely making progress, I guess.
Kapil, it's very interesting. We could go all night. When do you want to have us stop?